I'm going to call the meeting to order now. It's the CVRPC Board of Commissioners meeting on December 10th, 2019. Welcome, everyone. First thing we'll do is go around and introduce ourselves. I'm Laura Hill-Eubanks from Northfield, the chair of the commission.
Claire Rock, staff.
Bonnie Wanninger, staff on my way out the door.
George Clanberry, town planner.
Grace Benson, staff.
Alan Blackenbush, Duxbury.
Ron Crowd, Middlesex.
Michael Gray, Woodbury.
Jerry D'Amico, Roxbury.
Lee Catania, Orange.
Marcella Dunn, Montpelier.
Rich Turner, Williamstown.
Nick Kramer, staff.
Zach Maia, staff.
Amy Hardglass, Cabot. Robin Shuck, Marshfield.
Erin Torrey, Morton.
Julie Potter, East Montpelier.
Bill Aaron, Worcester.
Jack Pauley, East Montpelier, alternate. Peter Carty, Washington.
Emma Shadden, Berry City.
Nancy Chartrand, staff.
Steve Lott Speech, Waterbury.
Thank you all very much.
Byron Howard, Jerry
Oops,
Brabant.
sorry. Hi, Byron. Okay. Does anyone have any adjustments to the agenda before we get started? Hearing none. Would anyone like to make any public comments before we get started? Okay. The first up, we have two staff members who are going to tell us about the best practices of enhanced energy planning in Vermont, and I'll let them introduce themselves to you. Thanks very much. Take the floor.
Great, thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
So my name's Zachary Maia. I'm an assistant planner here at CVRPC. I've been on staff since February, and I'll let Nick introduce himself as well.
Yeah, I'm Nick Kramer. I'm an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer, and I've been at CVRPC since August. It's nice to meet you guys. I've interacted somewhat, but I've been helping everybody with a little bit of everything, including Zach with some energy stuff.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So this presentation today is really to inform you all of some lessons that we've learned throughout the process of going through working with you all on enhanced energy plans. We've done a lot of work over the past 3 years, and we've learned a lot on our end, and we thought it'd be a good time to give you all an overview and then provide an opportunity for us to have a little discussion on how these plans are working out. So pretty much our time today is going to be spent going over the enhanced energy planning process, what's in a plan, how these plans are adopted, how they're implemented as well. We'll also talk about the Section 248 process, where these plans would hopefully be applied, and how they're going to be applied in that process, as well as a general overview of it. I would like to note that as we move forward, if you have a clarifying question, absolutely feel free to raise your hand. We can discuss it right there. But if you have a more in-depth question that you want some discussion on, we're going to have some time at the end. So let's save those questions for that point in the discussion. So first part, talk about enhanced energy plans. So far, in our third year, we've done a lot of work so far. We've worked with 11 municipalities. So years 1 and 2, we focused on these over here. And this year, we've been working with Middlesex, Moortown, Plainfield, Waitsfield, and Woodbury. And these towns this year have really been special because they really represent towns that are at different parts of the process, whether they're looking to do an in-plan element versus an appendix plan. Also, whether or not they already have a municipal plan adopted. It's really been a great experience so far. And I'd also like to clarify that my work with this contract has only been over here. So if you do have questions about this, I'd love to entertain them, but I'm just warning you that I might not have answers for these towns. Nick. So, why should we adopt an enhanced energy plan? One approach we've seen is that there's a community desire to establish pathways to reach the state's 2050 goals. The most notable is the 90% renewable by 2050 goal. Another opportunity is to establish criteria for preferred site designation. We'll get more into what preferred sites are as we move forward, but that's an option. As well as the ability to receive, not achieve, substantial deference before the Public Utility Commission. It is important to note that when you are going for substantial deference, the planning process is to, establish clear community standards in your plan through this planning process. So, in preparing a plan, also I should note we will send these slides around afterwards. So if you're scribbling notes, don't worry, we'll get them to you. So, before we start the planning process, we really need to make sure that there's local capacity to take on this planning process. It is an optional planning process. It goes beyond the energy element that is in a municipal plan. But it is a lot of work. So I'm recognizing that's important to do. It's also important to have local consensus behind the plan. These plans really can elicit a lot of discussion amongst community members, and it's good to make sure that people are willing to have those discussions. It's also important to understand the requirements. Nick, if you want to press the button there. There is some standards that are in a checklist form. These really lay out all of the standards that are required to be met in an enhanced energy plan. CVRPC can help you understand those if you have any questions. It's also important to review the existing municipal plan. There's a lot of great information in your municipal plan that really feeds into this planning process. So step one really should be to look at your municipal plan. And then we can also review enhanced energy plans in neighboring municipalities. That list I had of 11 towns, those are towns that do have draft language for their enhanced energy plan already drafted. So if you have questions, please reach out to us at CVRPC and we can provide that. Another decision that needs to be made is what type of plan do you want to have? So I just had a conversation the other day with one of our municipalities. We were talking about this, and they asked me, should the plan be an appendix or should it be in the plan? And neither option is better than another. It just depends on sort of where you are in your overall municipal planning process. So a standalone plan is great if you have if you're a town that just adopted your municipal plan, and maybe the energy plan, you have 8 years, but you want to get that energy plan in. An appendix plan really proves to be a useful item in this. Being integrated in the plan is great if you're going through the municipal plan update process and you have some capacity and time to spend on replacing your energy element with this element. So just considering where you are, it's important to take note of. It's also important to determine responsibilities and develop a schedule when you're going through this. Like I said before, there's a lot of details in these plans, so it's really great to make sure that ahead of time you're figuring out who's responsible for what and what deadline you're really working on. Nick. Whoa, sorry. If you can go one back, thank you. So speaking of requirements, there's 3 major requirements. Your first one's going to be analysis and targets. So that's your background data. It's also going to be targets to achieve meeting certain standards, usually at 2025, 2035, and 2050. We're going to talk a bit more about this data in a few minutes. The next part is how you're going to achieve those targets. So pathways and implementation actions are similar to policy statements in your municipal plan, except they're a bit more explicit and actionable. The third part is mapping, and this is where you're going to see many towns and cities are identifying those preferred sites and those constraints and those unsuitable areas. So the first requirement, analysis and targets. Primarily, a lot of our work in the first few years was developing the regional and municipal data and targets. This is provided to you, and it's a little packet that looks a bit like this. It has some maps on at the end of it. And that really has all of the data and targets that you would need to put into an enhanced energy plan in order to satisfy this requirement. We do recognize that at this point it is 2019, and a lot of this data is 2015 and 2016 data. So with that being said, the Community Energy Dashboard and Efficiency Vermont, those really provide some opportunities for us to find more updated data, as well as just other data that we might find useful to include in our plan. all this data that's been included in this little packet, it's all in tables, and it's not very inspiring to look at immediately. It kind of could turn a reader away from your plan, make them a little bit unenthusiastic, and that's not really what we want to do with our plan. So consider adding graphics. That's really something that we've been trying to look at, see how we could do. And we're going to have some examples on the next slide. But just a reminder that sometimes when we are going through this data, we get into the weeds, we start questioning certain things about it. It's important to remember that the data they're just estimates for the most part. And that's okay, because really this is informing the planning process. It's informing your pathways. And it's giving the reader some background information. But it's okay if they're estimates. So an example of a graphic here is just showing the reader exactly certain levels of a solar capacity, of a solar facility's capacity. Oftentimes when we're talking about these different scales, like I will later, our eyes will probably glaze over. You're going to, it's easier to include pictures so that a reader kind of understands what you're explaining in the plan. Another real area where we've seen a lot of graphics employed is when we're talking about the renewable energy generation target by 2050. Usually that's a number like, 11.82 megawatts. And it's like, how do you understand how much land that really takes up? So an opportunity here is to show all of the land in your town. This is Highgate. And then the amount of all the solar potential in the town, and then the actual target. For those in the back of the room, you probably can't even see the dot. So it goes to show how achievable this target could be. Nick? And I'll hand it over to Nick at this point, switch places with him. He's going to talk a bit about sources of data.
All right. So I'm going to try this magic thing where I point at this and maybe my trusty accomplice here will click on it, because I have some links to go through. So yeah, as Zach alluded to, there's the older CVRPC data, and then there are probably the more updated, more relevant data available from the Energy Action Network and Efficiency Vermont. And there's overlap between all of these. I have sort of a concluding slide of where the best places to look, but a lot of it depends on your personal preference. So how you like to access data, whether it's super visually or in tables. These lay things out in different fashions. So the first, and in my opinion, for what it's worth, kind of most engaging data source is this community energy dashboard put out by the Energy Action Network. Does everybody know the Energy Action Network? That's familiar to everybody. Okay, so click. Get out of here. My wizard powers are a little slow today. Dun, 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 dun. Well, so as you can see, it's really engaging. Different parts to it. Interesting. Maybe this was a check before kind of thing. Should we try one more time?
Yeah, let's try it one more time. You get this
Looks like the
There we go.
Ta-da! Yes, thank you guys for hanging in there. So this is it. This is the community energy dashboard. It's got a whole lot of different parts, and I would be wasting everybody's time to go through every single piece tonight. But I do want to highlight some of the best, or maybe most useful components in this energy planning process. So the first thing, I think a good place to start, click, is with your community. So we're in Berlin. Click, there we are. Let's take a look. Berlin or Berlin?
Berlin.
You got it.
I don't know. I grew up down the road. I've heard mixed things. Okay. Anyways, so here we are in wherever we are, the capital of East-West Germany, and this is a graphic which right now I don't think conveys too much information because we're only in the latest data is from 2016. But this is looking at the projected trends of where we want to get with our renewables. Non-renewables, this is just a decrease in usage. So maybe as time evolves, this graphic will make a little bit more sense as you see the actual, that's what these little black lines are, the actual usage start to either hopefully mirror these trend lines. But scrolling down a little bit, you can see broken out by sector the current usage of this dark maroon color is non-renewable sourced energy, and then the yellow is more renewables. So if you want to dive into heat, electric, transportation, this is like the community snapshot. Down a little bit. Some nice fun facts I learned today in preparing for this presentation, that the average car at 25 miles per gallon, 600 gallons per year, that's not true for me, I drive farther, is produces the same amount of BTUs as heating your whole house for the whole year. I don't know. So some little like nuggets like that I think maybe enrich a plan. This whole website is really, really good, I think, about their methodology and their data sources. So on any page, if you scroll down far enough, there will be a little disclaimer. These graphs rely on the available data, for those of you who can't read in the back, from Efficiency Vermont, U.S. Energy Information, Agency of Transportation, VTrans, etc. So if you're curious or suspicious maybe of where a data point comes from, you could look there. So if we scoot back up, please, Zach. So if you're more of a visual person, like I said, this is right now kind of a meaningless graph. If you click here, there are two main map functions that this website offers. The first are these energy site maps. Click, click. Which again, you can break down either by town, county, RPC, if you're so inclined. So let's do, try Berlin, and we'll do categories. Say you're interested in looking at the specific number of ground-mounted solar sites, park and rides, and DC fast chargers, say, for whatever purposes you may have. So here, you can see, courtesy of satellite, Google. These are all the ground-mounted solar, I believe, these little orange pegs. There's your park and ride. And no fast chargers in Berlin? Does that sound right? Yeah? Okay.
Are those residences or businesses or what?
So if you scroll over, you can see 3145 Chase Road, ground-mounted PV, probably just a residence. They do show up commercial as well. But yeah, this gets down to, I had some fun looking at my neighbors. The data's out there. So this is a good way to get a sense. I sort of breezed through all of the different points. I will take requests if anybody's curious, wants to know something about anything. Otherwise, I'll keep plowing ahead. The other tool, if we go back one, Zach, to Energy Atlas, down. If you're more of a competitive type or you're trying to get a sense of where the maybe municipality falls in meeting its goals compared to your neighbors, this is a great tool. Click. Let's look at, what should we do? Anyone?
What are our choices?
What's that?
What are our choices?
Oh, sorry, yeah, super small. Solar, wind, hydro.
Fifth one down.
Fourth?
Fifth.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Biofuel. Yeah,
Nobody
let's
can
do
read
it.
it.
Go Plainfield, right? Oh, batteries. Well, whichever, yeah. Let's click on something. Or we could keep debating. Number of energy storage. I hear that's a good one. How about, let's go to maybe building efficiency. That's something we can all relate to. Number of housing units comprehensively weatherized is what this tiny pixelated text says. So, there it is, Vermont, how we're all doing. In this graphic, dark blue means more units weatherized per capita. So, Montpelier, a little beacon of weatherization hope. not so much orange, right?
Could you click on the darker towns? I'm just trying to figure out.
Who's who?
What kind of
Really?
towns are getting the darkest blue?
Sure, yeah, so St. Albans up here,
Okay.
over here, Victory.
Wow.
Three houses.
Well, right. As you guys know, in Vermont, it's really easy to be the most per capita because we don't have any capital. So
That's those are percentages.
these are percentages,
Yeah.
right? So Victory, it says total, 8. Total 8 per capita, 0.133 repeating. Right? Whereas Montpelier, for example, total 793. 0.10338. So,
Yeah.
with a grain of salt, right? But this is maybe a good tool. And I think you can switch. I think there is a way to toggle between percentages. But yeah, and then like Zach is about to do, you can do this also by county. So this can be a good tool. Again, bragging rights. The last thing I will say about this whole website, if you scroll up, please, Zach, this tab right here, municipal resources, is really, really handy. Packed full with probably more information than you want on your average day. But if we go down, they have a whole, all of these 4 headings with basically any energy planning related, or not even energy planning, energy related resource compiled here. So let's click on public policy, planning and infrastructure. Go down a little, energy planning. That's what we're talking about. Here is a brief overview of Act 174. I don't have it word for word myself yet, so I might be inclined to click on that. There's a nice little PDF with pages and pages of refresher. This is Comprehensive Guide to Developing an Energy Plan for Your Municipality. See, the U.S. Department of Energy's Guide to Community Energy Strategic Planning, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this, I think, for anybody who feels a little lost in the woods, may be a good, not that anybody in this room would ever feel like that, but this is a good resource too, right? Okay, I think, barring any questions on this website, yes, yeah, totally.
The data points on that first page,
Yeah.
are those meant to cite the sources of all that information? Is that what what do you mean?
The data points on which page?
On the first page we were on, at the bottom, it was listing all the sources of information for how many trips to, how much energy your car uses as opposed to heating your house.
So are you asking like when I was speaking about the data?
I was just curious.
I don't think that's an exhaustive list. No, that was for that one particular graphic. So I think actually, Zach, if you go to Energy Atlas and then scroll down, yeah, so now stop. So like this gives for each metric, for each thing, electrical usage, types of data, blah, blah, blah. Sources, Efficiency Vermont, Burlington Electric
cool.
Department.
So you could actually go
And so for each thing that you're looking at, you can find what the data source is. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Any other questions? Okay. Let's go back to the PowerPoint. Thank you, Zach. So that's one I really like. The other big source of energy data is Efficiency Vermont. They put out these annual and quarterly reports to the general public, which are, maybe not surprisingly, focused on savings and all of the good work that Efficiency Vermont does. So megawatt hours and millions of BTUs. They don't have any town level data in these general reports. So if you're interested in digging down into the town level, contact us. We have a specific CVRPC Efficiency Vermont report, which has, among other things, these kinds of breakdowns at the municipal level. So within electrical usage, there's residential, but you can look at, say, in the commercial sector, all of these data points. How many customers EVT has served, project counts, measure counts by category. That's sort of an enigmatic way of saying, like how many fridges have they installed, how many light bulbs, which I have an example. So if we go to the next one, this is the example of, this is taken from the first page of the CVRPC report. So you can see some of the types of data, and it goes back a couple years. So again, 2018 being the most recent, but we are anticipating a newer report fairly soon, I believe. Another example, this is like the town breakdown. This is just for electric usage and efficiency, kilowatt usage by year, Berrytown, etc. One more, please. And these are those measure counts that I was talking about. So, hot water fuel switch. Whoop. None of those so far, right? But it's in here anyways. Light bulbs, lots of light bulbs. Efficiency Vermont. Surprise, surprise. Right? Okay, so any questions on any of that? So this is another good resource, and maybe a little more concise if you don't want to spelunk around the website, the Energy Action Network website. It's a lot of it here. So this was my best attempt at a where do I look if I'm interested in blank slide. But the truth, like I said, is there's a lot of overlap. You can find the same data points on the EAN, in the Efficiency Vermont reports. I think personally for kind of project counts, those little map pin things, this is a really good place to start. If you're looking at getting a little more fine grain into like MBTUs saved, or specific things like Energy Star projects, if for whatever reason that's an important piece in the planning process, that's in the Efficiency Vermont report. And like I mentioned, they're coming out with a new one, a version 2.0, bigger and better and badder, and it has all of these extra, we're told, all of these extra data points. So not just savings up to this point, but lifetime savings of a project, looking at carbon emissions, home energy visits, DIY weatherization, sort of some broader categories. So, yeah, Claire.
I was just curious on the DIY weatherization. Do you have any idea on what data they'd be collecting to come up with that data?
It's a great question. The short answer is no. Me personally, I have no idea. This is sort of lifted from their public statement. Yeah, you're probably exactly right. Yes.
At one point, Efficiency Vermont was getting their electric usage data directly from the utilities. The utilities was reporting to it. The utilities would report it with sort of different methodologies, and at one point, at least my utility was reporting based on zip code, which puts most of their customers in East Montpelier in Montpelier.
Right.
Or in Plainfield, but not in East Montpelier. Do you know if that's been corrected?
So I'm, again, not personally the best person to speak for Efficiency Vermont's data methodology. I will say, so Zach, actually, if you can jump back 2 or 3, I'm not sure if it's included here. Efficiency Vermont receives billing data from electric distribution companies. They have some text in this report about their methodology. We just were present in October, we went up to VEIC in Burlington to hear Kelly, is that her name? Kelly, they have a data person who I would defer any questions to. They seem to be, obviously in all of this work, the methodology is the big looming elephant in the room, and I think that they took it fairly seriously. That to me sounds like an egregious enough kind of misrepresentation that I'm tempted to say yes, that it's been fixed, but I have no idea. It would be a good thing to follow up with them about. But great. Any other questions? Yes, Steve.
Are you going to get to transportation-related data, energy use for transportation?
Yeah, so I kind of glossed over it. It's in, I guess I'll put a quick plug back in for that Energy Action Network.
Okay.
They have a lot of transportation-related things. I mean, we looked at park and rides being one thing, but maybe if we have, we've got it maybe a second, if this doesn't take forever to load. Okay, sweet. So Energy Atlas, transportation, they've got a whole, okay, this is just talking about their data, but if we go maybe, Zach, to the Energy Atlas. Yeah, so sure, let's do community progress. So again, I'm sorry for those of you in the back, this is really small, but they have information on electric vehicles, this is number of sites, or total number of electric vehicle registrations. So let's try this one, actually. That's an interesting comparison. So you can see dark blue, the most per capita electric vehicle registrations. Montpelier, very dark. South Burlington? No. Plainfield? Yeah. So Steve, to your point, then transit. There was the park and rides. Some other things maybe are harder to capture in like a map form. Like for those of you who know about Phoenix's hitching post, I don't know that that fits tidily into any one of these. But so yes, there is some transportation, but I don't know if that really addressed your.
No, it's good.
Okay.
Just want to make sure it wasn't missed.
Yeah, no, because that's a huge part, right? When you look at those pie charts, and everybody knows that's our biggest emissions. So, great. Any other questions? Great. Then I'll turn it back over to Zach. Thank you.
All right. Well, I can't promise I'll be nearly as funny as Nick. But, so we'll keep going, pick up here in the requirements. We're back on pathways now. So we went through all this data, but what are we going to do about it? So when we talk about transportation, like Steve brought up, what is a municipality realistically going to do to try to bring that transportation emissions and energy usage down in their town? So starting off by looking at your existing policies, that's a great place to start when we talk about these plans. Maybe you've had a policy in your town plan that you would like to support another park and ride. Great, you didn't have to think about a new pathway because that is an actionable step that you could take. The CVRPC, we have plenty of information on pathways that you might choose to include in your plan. We have information from other municipalities in the region, as well as possibly some other inventive ones that might not be appropriate for some municipalities, but for others might seem great. So it's important to consider your municipal capacity in your jurisdiction as a municipality. So if you just have a planning commission, maybe your pathways aren't going to be the most ambitious because you realistically want to get as many of them done as you can. Whereas if you have municipal capacity, maybe an energy committee as well, now we have a lot of different players that we can have working on projects at the same time. So it's important to consider that when you're drafting these lists. Now an important part that I want to talk about here is that the method we've been doing, and I don't expect you to be able to read this, but we've been really identifying someone who is responsible for taking the action and following through on this pathway. Also getting a timeline in there, as well as a measure of success, so that when this plan is looked back on in 8 years, 6 years, 4 years maybe as an interim check-in, you can see how are you doing, and you're not leaving anything up in the air in question. Nick, if you can go to the next slide. So here's some examples of some pathways that municipalities might be interested in. So this first one here talks about logging and inventorying fuel efficiency of municipal vehicles, so that when you're going to purchase or replace a new vehicle or a used vehicle, you at least can consider fuel efficiency if you're not already. Nick, do you want to go to the next one? Another opportunity here is if there's any major employers in your municipality, trying to see if they have any interest or ability to change over some of their fleet to electric vehicles or biodiesel, if possible. The last one here kind of gets at a different pathway, and that is kind of the development land use pathway, which really looking to see if you can see in your zoning or your future land use map if you can target development in certain areas and then pursue conservation in others, so that you're kind of getting at those transportation goals as well. So the last part requirement here is mapping, and this is kind of where it gets fun or not fun, depending on your outlook. So the first thing is that CVRPC has provided maps, and they look a bit like this. There we go. This is the real map. And Nick and I didn't practice this, but we really should have seen it coming. So CVRPC provided plenty of maps that show potential for solar and wind development. They also show constraints, known like highly restricting constraints and possible constraints. And they also show, hydroelectric biomass capacity as well as existing generation. So these maps are great on the surface to look at. I mean, they're interesting, they make you think, but they really guide decision making when it comes to preferred sites. So looking at these maps and considering what areas in town are suitable for solar. Maybe Middlesex doesn't really want to focus on this part of town because there's not really potential there. So kind of just thinking about things like that. Also thinking about local constraints. So if there's not a constraint that the state's identified, which would be kind of a town-wide thing, like for example, like a highest priority forest block, or maybe agricultural soils, those are state identified ones. Something like that that's across the town that you want to protect. This is an opportunity to do that as well. Also an opportunity to identify unsuitable areas. So maybe there's an area in town, like a town forest, that you want to preserve. This is a good idea to bring it into this section here. No matter what you end up choosing to do, it's really important to address these using clear policy statements. So you don't want to leave anything ambiguous out up to interpretation when it comes to this plan being applied. Are there any questions on this before we move a little bit further?
Such as, can you explain that last point, for example?
I will get into it. But if we go back, so a clear policy statement might look, it shouldn't say, well, I just said should, but it should have shall and must as the action verbs in it. So the town forest shall remain preserved, things like that, versus it should, because that's not really a strong statement. We'll get a bit more into it later, but great. Anything else? Just want to check in to make sure everyone's still with me. So moving into preferred sites a little bit here, I wanted to talk about how we identify these sites and why they're important. So preferred sites are identified in the municipal plan or through a joint letter, which is part of the net metering application. So in the municipal plan, you can identify specific sites. You could put up the parcels on a map and say, that one, that one, that one. Probably not as quickly, but considering a bunch of different factors, that's one way you can do it. You could also create a process or a criteria. So saying, these are certain values that we have, but not every site might be perfect. Maybe we should consider the different criteria on the site. A word of caution would be that we're going to talk about Section 248, but the Public Utility Commission, it might not really be their cup of tea to see criteria, because they want those clear policy statements and they want very strong language about what is and what isn't suitable in their town. So there's some things to consider there. Thank you. I'll go to the next slide. So why designate them though? These sites are going to get better rates for net metering, which means that incentivizes the development of them because the landowner would get a shorter payback period on their investment. Ultimately, they're in preferable locations, so you might avoid some land use conflict if you can. They really unlock the development for 150 to 500 kilowatt net metering facilities, as those ones have to be built on a preferred site. And then ultimately they're going to help you reach your 2050 goals, again, while mitigating land use conflicts. And quicker as well. There's 4 different categories, and we're going to talk a bit about those later. But this was just to show you the Public Utility Commission changed rates, and pretty much it ends up being that the Public Utility Commission really wants to incentivize under 15 kilowatt facilities, as well as the 15 to 150 on preferred sites as well. So when it comes to, you've got the plan, you've identified all of your constraints, preferred sites, everything else, it's really important to remember, because there can be a lot of buzz around these plans, that they need to be consistent with the municipal plan, and that they're going to end up being a part of that plan. So building local support and having us along in the process will really help that out. And we would eventually issue you an affirmative determination of energy compliance if we find that your plan meets the criteria, because we have an approved regional plan. Like Nick said, it's really important to use these resources like the community progress maps to see how we're doing. It's really, when we have those data packets that we gave out in 2015 or 2016, 2015 data, sometimes, as we move forward, we're going to be losing a little bit of that context. So this provides an easy way to check in on how we're doing. And if this seems like a lot, don't worry, because CVRPC has a contract with Efficiency Vermont, and we're going to be working on implementation of these plans, past adoption, through that contract. This involves us supporting your town or city on button-up events, but also holding regional energy events. For example, we are going to be holding a modern wood heat workshop tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. So if you're interested in wood heat, I know some Woodbury folks are super interested in it, so we're going to have some strong showing from them. It'll be at the Barry City Elementary School. We're going to have Emma Hansen and Andrew Perchlik there as well. Emma Hansen's the wood heat coordinator for Agency of Natural Resources. Andrew Perchlik is the director of the Clean Energy Development Fund. Yeah.
Is any air quality person going to be there?
We did not invite anyone who is an air quality expert necessarily, but we would hope that someone would show up with an interest in it so we could talk about it.
I did have one person today say he's going to bring the Lorax to read to us.
That was lost on this side of the aisle.
Great. Any other discussion on that?
All right.
So now we've gone to the cake of tonight. We're going to be talking about Section 248. So going into this, I just want to lay it out that we're not really going to get super in-depth tonight. I just want to provide an overview for those members who might not be aware of how this process works, and an opportunity to just kind of walk through a process and see kind of what we're talking about. So I'm just going to flip open my notes here, because I do have a lot of them at this point. But Section 248, as background, really outlines a process for any utility to get a certificate, or developer to get a certificate of public good, proving that their facility, can be built. Really, this process defines who can be involved, who can participate, and it also provides criteria kind of similar to Act 250 in terms of, how these facilities are going to be assessed for if they actually are in the public good. So there are a couple different applications under Section 248. First of which is net metering. So there's different categories in net metering systems, like I've said before, and they are going to differ a little bit in terms of how we're actually looking at them and what process they have to go through. We'll talk about that in a bit. Utility scale projects, I should mention, net metering only goes up to 500 kilowatts. Anything above that is going to need to go through a separate process, such as a utility scale project. Standard offer provides for facilities up to 2.2 megawatts. And there's also power purchase agreements with electric utilities. And they could also go through the Public Utilities Regulatory Policy Act as well, which would require them. I'm not going to get into that right now. But these are the options that are out there. So who can participate? So there's automatic formal parties, such as the applicant, Department of Public Service, Agency of Natural Resources, RPCs, and the municipality. I only started that because that's who we are. So it's important to realize that. So as a formal party, we can provide written testimony, but we can't actually speak at public hearings. But we get to go through the process. Interested persons can, get updates and information about the proceeding as it moves forward. They cannot participate. Members of the public can speak at public hearings, and they can follow the proceedings, but they can't actually engage in a hearing. they can't actually engage at the level of a formal party unless they petition to. So we're going to go through the steps of this process, but I want to recognize first of all that for net metering facilities, they're really going to go through different processes. So for a small net metering facility, it's going to be much more of an administrative review by the Public Utility Commission. They're going to give a 45-day notice, but after that, their application, if they address the public comments, will not have to go through all of this. Large facilities, it's very similar with 45-day notice, adding on a 30-day notice afterwards where more public comments can be addressed. And then the utility scale projects have to go through this thing. So, with that being said, Nick, if you want to jump into the next one here. The 45-day notice, I kind of proposed a little abstract situation where, let's say a solar developer proposes a large facility in a municipality. So, at this point, in 45 days, say the municipality holds a public hearing on this proposed facility. They would log kind of what they've heard at the meeting, and then ultimately they have the option to submit comments 7 days ahead of the filing date.
Municipality submits the comment.
Yes, municipality would. Apologize for that. 7 days ahead of filing summarizing activities. So after filing, the case is assigned a docket number, and there's a pre-hearing conference. Important to note that there's no pre-hearing conferences for those net metering facilities. But at this pre-hearing conference, you're going to identify who the parties are that can be involved in this. Oh wait, go back one.
And it's the Public Utility Commission now. They've renamed it since I guess it was created.
Yeah.
PSB.
So this is an older graphic, so
Yeah.
anything that says PSB technically should be PUC. Just a clarifying note there. So next slide, Nick. So then after the pre-hearing conference, there's an intervention deadline, which means that the municipality needs to make a decision, decide, are we going to be a formal party and intervene, or are we just going to submit public comments? It's important to note that intervention will require significant time, money, and it will also take up a lot of municipal capacity. So it's important to consider that before jumping in and intervening without actually having the time, money, or capacity. So it's important to think about these questions in advance. Could we solve any of our issues by having a public hearing 45 days in advance in that 45-day notice? What is the project's positive and negative benefit to this community or impact on this community? And then what are the benefits and costs of intervening? And then what criteria are you actually interested in? It's important to go through that process. So then the next part of this is a site visit and public hearing, and I'm said next part because this really could happen anywhere between the intervention deadline and the technical hearing. So it's really a long span of time. Could have multiple of them if the developer is interested in that, municipality as well. It's not it won't create any evidence, but it's allowing the public to make comments on the project. And ultimately, you're going to see the site, say, how is this going to affect existing conditions? And are there any alternative locations where this project could go? At this point, we start getting a little more technical here. In terms of discovery, we're going to see that parties are going to start asking questions about testimony and exhibits that have been presented. There's a lot of strict rules here, many steps in the process. I don't want to go into those right now. But ultimately, the criteria that a municipality could be focusing on is the first criteria, orderly development of the region, and the fifth criteria, which primarily concerns Act 250 criteria. So after we've gone through that process, we get to the technical hearing, which is like a trial, but all the testimony is pre-filed at this point, and there's no new evidence. So there's different levels where smaller facilities will get a hearing with a hearing officer and another staff member, but a large facility, like the one that I'm kind of imagining, would go before the whole board of the Public Utility Commission, as well as staff members from their office. Important to note, PUC may ask questions not raised in any pre-filed testimony. The end is in sight. So now at the end of this, after the technical hearing, there's an opportunity to file an initial brief and a reply brief as well. So this is an opportunity to cite facts from the record or statute, applicable statutes, rules, regulations, any precedent, and really explain your position. It's important to remember that there can be no new evidence at this point. And then taking all of this into consideration, the Public Utility Commission will issue a decision. And ultimately, it's important to note that an appeal from the Public Utility Commission will go to the Vermont Supreme Court. So that was a lot. Glad everyone's still moving. Ultimately, I just want to get, if you're going to take something away from this, the criteria that's really at hand here is the criteria of orderly development of the region. It's going to consider land conservation impacts and on a regional level. And it's going to assess undue interference. So it's important to consider those when we're drafting our enhanced energy plans. Another criteria here is the Act 250 criteria, natural resources, aesthetics, and historic sites. There's also other criteria such as the economic benefit to the region and things like that. But for an enhanced energy plan, we're mainly looking at these two. So how can we be effective in actually writing plans that will get to addressing those criteria? So, like I said before, we're talking about undue interference, and that is because really a municipal plan has due consideration before the Public Utility Commission. The Public Utility Commission has pretty broad discretion in how they're going to apply your language. But if you go through the enhanced energy planning process, you will get substantial deference, which means that they kind of are limited in how much discretion they have to apply the language in your plan. Now, before all the hands go up, so Section 248 just brings people's hands up, there really hasn't been that much case law here. We don't really know how this is playing out. But it's not to say that we shouldn't plan, because we should. But just keep that in mind as we're going forward here.
There's actually zero case law.
Nobody knows what substantial deference is actually going to be.
That's correct.
We're just guessing.
So, with that being said, the Public Utility Commission, through our work over the past 3 years, we've worked with them to define some best practices for what they want to see and what we think plans should have in them. So, effective energy plans, we do have a guidance document that says this, but the Public Utility Commission really wants to see reasonable recommendations. So if you're going to have a policy in your enhanced energy plan, they want to see it throughout the rest of the plan. They want to make sure that it really fits in with your whole plan. Based on well-established and specific planning goals, still, across the whole plan. And discussing land conservation measures and specific policies. So like I was saying earlier with the, it's not the shoulds, more like the musts or shalls should be in those policy statements. And that is all that we have for you in terms of information that's just coming at you. We have some time, just a little bit of time, I think, for questions. Good amount of time, so.
It's more of a kind of a observation or statement, and I know this has been an ongoing question. There has not been a case yet where they've applied these new planning criteria, i.e. substantial deference. There's also a question about how the Department of Public Service, which is supposed to be the public advocate, how they will behave under this new set of standards. So if we as a region or we as a town develop a plan, we're supposed to get substantial deference. The project does not fit our plan, say, in our town, and our participation argues against a project. The DPS, the Department of Public Service's longer history is that they get in the back room with the developer and they cut deals, compromise, halfway deals. So the question has been asked and no answer has been given. Will the DPS side with communities who have gone through this planning process and where a project is inconsistent with the town plan, and should not be receive substantial deference, or the plan's receiving substantial deference, will the DPS concur with the town's position, or will they challenge the town? It's a big question, and the legislature didn't speak to it. I think it's unfortunate. I think they should be, if they're acting in the public interest, and the public's invested all this time and effort. But that's a big outlier.
Amy?
That makes me wonder, would having these regions in your plan, that you're open to these kinds of development, could that, if that's the case, be opening the door to these developers who are now going to get more of these breaks and things, more of an open door than if maybe you didn't have it written in?
There's a law firm, Downs, Rockland and Martin, that was hired by a very large energy developer, who's called every town clerk in the state and has continually been calling to find out what towns have reached, gone through this planning process, so that their plans have substantial deference, so they can then come in and find out where those sites are. I guess so they can approach the landowners to bring projects to the town. So maybe an incentive for these for-profit developers, not necessarily from Vermont, to come to your town and propose a big development, FYI.
Bram?
I strongly suggest that everybody take time and look at some recent revelations that were issued. And if you look under Vermont Public Radio, there's an incredibly disturbing piece regarding the Public Utility Commission and its relationship with some large utilities. And I really think my town has a small case in front of the PUC, which involves Green Mountain Power. And I tell you, I really think this is a very flawed process, and we need to contact the legislature and really take a look. It's not that the PUC did anything illegal, but the optics of what went on is extremely troubling.
And Julie was next. Go ahead.
Zach, you mentioned a guidance document.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a link to that on the RPC's website?
So I haven't looked at our website in a little bit, but
and are you going to post these slides on the RPC's website?
Yes, we will for sure, and we'll make the guidance document available. It's been updated annually through our contract with NRPC, so we should probably get the latest version up if that version online isn't. So good enough, really. Thank you.
I've got a question going back to the relationship between the energy plans and the municipal plan, and it struck me you had a comment going through the process where if the municipality is going to intervene or make comment that it needs to be grounded in the municipal plan. We adopted an energy plan in conjunction with updating our municipal plan, but wouldn't it be important if the energy plan is developed and adopted out of cycle with municipal plan, wouldn't it be important to incorporate language in the municipal plan that recognizes the energy plan and vice versa, so the two are linked together? And the energy chapter, especially in the municipal plan, references and maybe summarizes the energy plan.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's, in your case, you have a shorter energy chapter and then the
Right.
larger appendix plan. So the Public Utility Commission looks at the whole plan. They're not just taking out the enhanced energy element and looking at that on its own.
Right.
So realistically, I believe, I'm just saying, but the whole plan is applied. So I might be missing your question there.
Well, that's my point. If let's say the Public Utility Commission or the Public Service Department is looking at the municipal plan and looking at an energy plan as well, from a planning perspective, don't the two need to be tied together in some way, as far as that the energy chapter in the plan needs to, if the municipality has an approved energy plan, it seems like the municipal plan needs to reference it. And if let's say a municipality is developing and adopting an energy plan out of cycle, I know I'm kind of repeating myself, but would it make sense for the municipality to go back and amend the municipal plan and add some language into the energy chapter to cite that energy plan so the two get linked together?
Yes, because they will, when you're going through and getting that enhanced energy plan incorporated into your municipal plan, you have to go through the same municipal plan adoption process. So there is an opportunity to go back into your municipal plan and make those changes so that it's referencing the enhanced energy plans.
Okay. So it really can't be done independent of the municipal plan. What I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying. So you do need to update or amend the municipal plan in order to adopt an energy plan? Is that what you're saying?
To get your enhanced energy plan into your plan, you need to go through the same municipal plan adoption, so have your public hearings.
Right.
For the plan. If you need to go to a vote, go to a vote.
Right, okay.
So realistically, you're altering your municipal plan. So you would have to, in some cases, update your municipal plan if it's out of date and there's new requirements. So you're still having to update the municipal plan. So yes, you would have an opportunity to change the text.
Do you find that, I don't know how many energy plans there are in central Vermont at this point, not that many, I don't think. But do you find that energy committees are really involved in writing the plan? Or what has your experience been?
So my experience is with 5 municipalities.
Okay.
It seems from my look at previous contracts and our records online, we have about 11 drafts in circulation.
Right.
One of those drafts has been approved. Okay. So with that being said, it's really up to the municipality. Some municipalities, their energy committees are very active, very involved, and they want to do this. But for some others, maybe that energy committee only has the capacity to do a couple events at the time, and they don't really find themselves eager to jump into this planning process. So it really depends on the municipality. My work has been primarily with planning commissions.
Right. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, all right. This is maybe a little off the exact legal topic here, but my group has heard me speaking about this before. The energy, all energy stuff, and I have, if anyone's interested, I have, the people have asked me about this, I'm renting the power wall from Green Mountain Power. And I have 23 solar panels. So since I've gotten this, and I get records every day, actually more, I made some interesting energy charts. And this is not exactly for the legal, this is for my whole concept of this. The energy solution is not as simple as it looks. And I can leave with Bonnie, she can make copies. What I've done is since May, I guess, I can read daily my kilowatt hours I get. And I made a chart and breaking that up into groups of 5, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, so on kilowatt hours. And for the day. And it's very interesting because Bonnie can do these. I just printed this out tonight, so this is up to yesterday. The 0 to 5 kilowatt hours I'm generating from my solar, and the higher one, like the 15 to 20. Very clear when you look down here what happens between the summer and the winter. The bluish is the low value, and the orange is the high in the summer. Come the winter, now, some of this is due to snow on the panels, which is a problem. I don't see any way these big solar fields of 100 acres of that, how we're going to get the snow off. Unless they heat them, and then you lose the energy to heat them. So that's another, and I really think, even though this is somewhat technical, I really think the energy plans and our energy stuff has to include, is this practical? In other words, I don't care how much energy I get for the year. I'm interested in when I need that energy today. It's like eating. I can say, well, you know, I need so many calories a year, I eat all at once. So that's not gonna keep me alive another 364 days a year. So we have an energy storage problem. Some of this should be encountered. Energy plan should include the problems of storage, plus the environmental batteries and so on. Lithium batteries and that, you read articles where they scrounging lithium off lakes in the Andes Mountains and ruining the environment. And all this should be included in an energy plan. It's not, this is not environmental free. So and I say, if anyone's interested, I can go on with this more, but I find my own generation, of course this is how much power I use normally. In the summertime, I usually generate a little more than I use during the day. This, once fall and winter has come, almost never. So someone has to make up that power. The extra energy has to come from someplace, at some time. And I've talked to, I know I've talked to some people here. It has to come from someplace, sometime. So where is that going to come from? It's going to, when Vermont's cloudy, like today, I suspect nobody's hardly generating anything, or very little. And I talked to my daughter down in the Carolinas, they're cloudy. So somehow that energy we need for today has to have been generated somehow. And it's going to have to come from utilities or some other, maybe hydropower, which we like, maybe wind power, which is another story I don't want to get involved in. But I think this has to be included in any energy plan, the environmental cost of this stuff. And I'm certainly for this, I say, I'm renting from Green Mountain Power, I've talked to several people. I've been very happy with this system. It saved me, last month we had a tree went down our road, I was out, my power, my regular power was out a day. And I didn't really worry about it, neither did our neighbor had, because we have our batteries. And I didn't have to worry about a generator, didn't have to worry about all that other stuff. So it's a great idea, but let's be realistic. It's not, it's other problems besides, you see the figures. We've generated, we're having some figures of it. This is how much solar power we got for a year. That's good, but it doesn't help me if I want my light on now. I'm not going to tell the light wait until July for electricity. So this is the problem that's not included and even in the national stuff, it's not included. And when you start plugging in your car, I figure, I'm retired so I don't drive that much, but I figured it would take me, from what I read about all electric cars, from where I live to Burlington and back, I use about 25 kilowatt hours battery. That would be at least a day and a half, except in the most sunny days, for me to charge my car home from that. That's just the car, not running the rest of the house. So please, be realistic about some of this stuff. It's not, you plug your car in, yeah, today I think I got 1 kilowatt hour of electricity, which is about enough to run a few highly efficient light bulbs for a day, let alone charge a car if I need it. So let's try, can we get, in these plans, the legal stuff is one thing which I'm not going to get involved in, but this goes beyond the legal, this goes beyond. What is practical, what is good? This is good, but it's not going to solve the energy problem. So I think okay, if you have an environmental problem, I point out with, I'm glad you mentioned about air pollution with burning wood. So we have that problem, and of course, some of us, wood is not convenient. Convenient if you go away for a week, who's going to run stuff? So let's try again. The plan should include the environmental cost of this. People say, "Oh, we grow enough wood in Vermont." That may be, but if you're logging that wood, you're going to leave a mess. There's no way to log it. The fellow that does some of our logging, he's very careful, but you can't log that leaving a mess. So all that has to be taken into account, and it's not the state plan that does not, there's no hint of that in the state plan as far as I can see. And I said I can talk about wind power, which we've talked about a lot. But there's no hint in any of these plans that this, again, is, you know, the plans are legal, but if this system's gonna make a, people are gonna accept it, people are going to make some use of it, and I'm trying to make use of it, it has to be included, I think, and realistically in the plan. And I don't see any of this legal stuff in there. They talk all this land. And let me just mention one thing about wind power. We talk about wind power. We talk in the state lists wind power. Does anybody in the state read the newspapers about pulling windmills around? You mention a windmill and they generate enough paper print to run the, to make up the energy. So, does anyone read these when they come up with these ideas? That's my comment, and if Bonnie, Claire, I'll leave you with stuff and explain. All right, that's my statement.
Good points, Ron, thank you very much. Anybody have another question? Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just talking about wood heat. I've been a little bit alarmed at the, seems like anti-wood burning sort of direction things are going in, and I'm wondering where these energy plans fall when it comes to wood heat. Is it considered green and renewable? Because if we think of carbon footprint, we think of air quality, you know, the amount of pollution that goes into creating oil and mining it and shipping it and, you know, piping it and everything else and refining it and transporting it and then getting it to my house and then burning it and then what I release. It's
And
nothing.
blood.
Yes, right.
There's blood
And
there.
people and economies and everything else. Compared to, you know, we just use the fallen down trees we have to thin out anyway. We heat our house with it, we chop it,
Yeah.
burn it, it grows. We chop it, we burn it, grows. I mean, it seems like the cleanest thing, you know, we could be doing, and I'm a little worried. What's the direction that these plans are going in as far as wood heat?
Yeah, so I can't speak too much on, you know, the direction because I don't want to speak for municipalities, but from the data that we've provided municipalities, the targets for wood heat are much lower than the targets for cold climate heat pumps.
What do you mean low targets for what?
So say, so there's, you know, interim targets, but by 2050, you know, there's a set amount of all transitions to alternative fuels for heating purposes. And we, in our data, have information on wood heat, as well as cold climate heat pumps, and target numbers out of the amount of households in a municipality that would convert. The cold climate heat pumps are generally, I would say, like 3 to 5 times a larger number than the transitions to wood heat, just by the data that we've
Would that be
provided.
maintaining it as, like, does that mean the trajectory will be going up, the same, or down as far as what they hope people will be doing with burning wood?
So the trajectory for electric heat would be going up
Yeah,
at a
but-
higher rate than the wood, but the wood would still be going up.
Would still be going up, okay, so it's not about trying to get rid of it or eliminate it or?
No,
it's still
the state still recognizes it as a, I'm not sure how they classify it, but in the comprehensive energy plan, but as renewable.
very- Okay, cool, thank you. That's helpful.
I think really quickly I'll say, another plug for tomorrow, this is like the perfect forum for voicing some of these concerns. I think your points are really good ones, and it's not always a conversation of what is like the savior answer, but what is the lesser of two evils in some cases, and comparing different things. And these two presenters were probably good. I think it's speaking to that. I've had a personal journey with wood heat recently, and like shocked to find that like one efficient pellet stove emits 1/200th as much particulates as like a traditional hardwood stove. And so there's
Right, but it doesn't include, like what Ron was saying, the embedded energy of making those pellets, shipping that
Right,
to where the
right.
pellet
So it's
factory
all-
is, and making the pellets and shipping them back.
Totally.
So to me, I think if you looked at the big picture, I'm not sure how that would all, and then the electricity to run, doesn't it auto feed, and, you know, you've got, it's,
Right.
there's a way
So
more
it has to
than
just
just a
challenge
chainsaw.
conversation.
Yeah.
Specifically towards what you're talking about, Amy, it is my understanding the state does want to wean people off of log wood heat.
That's what I
And wants
thought.
to get people so that they need to get wood pellets that are, well, you've got to go to the manufacturer of the wood pellets to get them.
Yeah.
You can't burn logs in your wood pellet stove.
Yeah, that's what, I've been concerned about all of that. Very concerned, because that's what it's affordable for people and environmental. We're gonna freeze. They got away from us, I'm sorry. It's true.
Anyone else? Great presentation. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to look at the Regional Plan Committee Rules of Procedure for approval on page 2. The Regional Plan Committee started meeting again in the last few months to start working on the new regional plan, which I believe is due in 2024. We're hoping to get a jump on it. I don't know if you've all read it. Does anyone have any questions or comments on it? Julie?
Laura, you mentioned to me that there's a minor disconnect between the terms for members of the Regional Plan Committee and what it says for that committee in the draft bylaws. The disconnect exists because there were no draft rules and procedures for this committee when the draft bylaws were being drafted. And so there wasn't something to look to, otherwise it would have matched up. What I'd like to suggest to make this simple and clean and not have a conflict is that on the bottom of page 2, where it says membership, the Regional Plan Committee shall consist of 5 representatives of the Board of Commissioners who serve. And I suggest we say 1-year term, so that when they're appointed at the annual meeting, it's done on an annual basis.
Okay.
And then that would match up with what is in the draft bylaws amendment.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Then you would have to strike the following sentence, correct?
Right.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Does everyone understand that conflict? Because we're working on the bylaws, everything didn't sync up exactly right. In fact, there are other conflicts with some of the other committees' rules of procedures just because of the language of how you describe either a special or a standing committee, and we'll just have to go through and amend those rules of procedures for the committees, which isn't that big of a deal, but that's how it's going to have to go.
It's easier to update rules of procedures for committees than it is to
amend
the bylaw.
Absolutely. Which we may do periodically anyway with the rules of procedure for the committees. Any other comments or questions?
I just wanted to note that if the second sentence was going to be struck,
The third one
then the
also.
third one would have to be also.
Yes. Yep. Okay.
You looking for a motion to adopt?
We are.
So moved.
All right. Jerry has made a motion. I think it would have to be a motion to adopt with the changes we just talked about.
As modified.
Okay.
I'll second.
Graham seconds. Any further discussion or comments? In that case, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? The rules of procedure for the Regional Plan Committee are approved. Thank you. Next up, we have the CVRPC Bylaw amendment, which Julie Potter and the committee has been working on for, I guess, a little over a year. And we hope we're finished at this point. And I'll let Julie, if you have anything you want to explain.
So, the draft has been before the committee in a couple of iterations. This iteration is the same as you saw last month. Last month, we voted to put it on this month's agenda. If we want to pass it tonight, it cannot be amended. It has to be voted on the way it's presented to you tonight. If you want to amend it, then we need to put it on some future commission agenda instead. But there are no changes from what you saw last month, other than I had to update the memo. So the process for this is that we would need to have 60% of the towns voting affirmatively. That's not people, 60% of people here tonight, it's 60% of all of the towns that are members. So that means we need 14 to approve this. And it's why, and that's the reason why you got a couple of prompts to make sure you come tonight. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them, or try to. Jerry?
Yeah, and the membership and representation, this is strictly a question. We list the city of Barry, and I realize there's Barry Town and Barry City to differentiate, but why do we list City of Montpelier? Is that the official name of Montpelier?
That is probably legacy from our current bylaws. Some things did not change as it got moved and reorganized.
It was just a question, it's not...
So, we have 2 cities in this region, which is the city of Barry and the city of Montpelier. We always make sure we talk about Barry City, just to distinguish it from Barry Town. But, I mean, it's just referring to it as being a city, the city of Montpelier.
I was just curious if that was the official name of the city.
City of Montpelier. City of Montpelier, absolutely.
I mean,
Well, it says on the
it's not just
sign.
Montpelier. It's
Marcellus
Waterbury,
signs-
not
Marcellus
town of
Apex
Waterbury.
is city of Montpelier, so
No,
we'll
it's just
take that
a
as-
question. I had one other comment. I think we owe the committee that worked on this, including especially Julie, a vote of thank you for the amount of work that it took to rewrite these.
It was an interesting project, trying to think everything through systematically and making sure that stuff we're likely to need moving forward is being addressed. It was prompted really by some challenges we've had in trying to figure out how to staff committees every year, because the bylaws didn't provide sufficient guidance. But it ended up being a number of other things that became apparent that we needed to add new language or update or something as we went through. But it's been very interesting, and I appreciate the help from Steve Blackspeak and Rich Turner as we went through this as well. But thank you.
Peter?
Yes, just to get it on the floor, I would move that we approve the bylaw changes as written.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion by Peter to approve and second by Janet. Any further discussion or comments? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining? The bylaws are approved. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right, on to the minutes. At 37. Does anyone have any corrections or comments on the minutes from the last meeting? I'll give you a minute.
I'll make a motion we approve them. Is it time
Amy-
for
Sure, always talk to that. Amy makes a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Steve seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All those abstaining?
Abstain.
Ron abstains.
That was it, yeah.
And the minutes are,
Explain that.
thanks, Ron. And the
Just
minutes,
as much energy, Ron. Staying.
Should have explained why.
okay, and the minutes, they're approved. Thank you. Let's see where we are. Staff and committee reports. Does anyone want to update us on anything important? Oh, Bonnie's here.
The Barry City Council endorsed the Greater Barry Area Working Communities Initiative grant application that CVRPC has been facilitating. It's a partnership of something like 20 agencies, organizations, employers, and others with a big audacious goal of fostering a workforce development system that bridges gaps between employers and employers, focusing at a target population of single women households with children. There are about 16% of Berry households in that target population, and 60% of them live below the federal poverty level. That's in extreme poverty. It means a parent with a child lives on $12,000 a year or less. So how do we bring folks in an era where we need everybody who we can in the workforce? How do we better support employers and those potential employees to help them work if they so choose to? So it's a big audacious goal, and over 30 years, we're gonna make a dent.
30 years.
So, or 10 years, sorry. So the council endorsed that tonight, and I apologize for not being here.
Yeah.
And you've met the new faces on staff that have been here a little while. You might
She hasn't
not
been
have
properly.
Yeah, no.
I've been sitting here thinking, oh, shoot. So Grace Vincent is our new planner. Her area of focus is emergency management and what we're calling something like special projects. So it might be natural resources, it might be transportation, but she's our adaptable between program person is the intent of her position. Grace was formerly employed at the Clark Group, which is a private firm in Montpelier, and lives in Essex. And have you guys met Zach and Nick before?
Zach, yes.
Zach's been on board since February, part-time, May, full-time. Nick is our VISTA member who's been supporting the Working Communities Grant and a lot of other initiatives. Zach is just going gangbusters. So this new team joins our current team of Claire, Dan, Pam, and Ashley, and Nancy, who have been here longer.
Great. Thank you very much, and congratulations on your meeting.
The city of Mayor, the city of boy, it's been a long way. Mayor Herring, that's an easier way to do it, enjoyed his 40th birthday today, and his brother came to the city council meeting to help him celebrate. So take a look at public access television.
It's dedication. Does anyone else have anything before we adjourn?
There was one other item.
Sorry.
We may be asking you to fill out an evaluation for the presentation that you had this evening, but we'll maybe sending that around tomorrow.
And thank you for helping us meet a grant deliverable. Please participate.
Thank you. With that said, I think we are ready for adjournment. We need a motion, and Don's not here.
Don's not here.
Dara makes the motion. Thank you, Dara.
I'll second.
And Julie seconds. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, all abstaining. Thank you for coming, and see you next month.